Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Therapists Uncensored. We are so excited about our episode today and discussing racial trauma with two incredible trauma therapists. So why don't we begin by either of you speaking and just letting us know kind of how you identify personally, professionally, and kind of get the frame so that people will understand who they're hearing and your perspective.
So my name is Glyceria Perez, and I'm a bilingual trauma therapist, and I'm located in New Jersey. And my pronouns are she, her, and ella. And I'm a licensed clinical social worker.
There you go, social work.
Hi, my name is Deborah Chapman Finley, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers. I am in private practice in New Jersey as well. I'm a trauma therapist, and I'm a licensed professional counselor and a national certified counselor.
Wonderful. I so appreciate you all being generous enough to come on and to share your perspective. How about we begin by just telling us some of, you didn't know these things all along. There was a discovery process. Mm-hmm. So, and I think it's probably very similar to, people will be all along this journey. So could you just sort of walk us through kind of your discovery process, your unfolding?
Mm-hmm. So I just want to say I was born and raised, I was born in Cuba, but raised in New York and New Jersey. And so I came with a different language and a different culture coming into this country. And so when I went to work, as a professional, I was always asked, oh, do you speak another language? And I'm like, yes, I speak Spanish. And so, I would get hired because they needed people who spoke Spanish. And at that time, I didn't know that I was getting paid the exact same amount of money as, my counterparts who were monolingual, but at my caseload was like super high. And, but anyway, so
you were expected to do more work.
Exactly. Expected to do more work with the same pay as other people. And that never sat well with me because what I started to learn was that I wasn't just like orientating the clients to at that time I was working in Child Protective Services. So there was a lot of stuff that went on, and I had to like translate the documents, whatever documents they needed to sign, into Spanish. I had to interpret for them with whatever systems, we were up against or whatever it was that was going on. And so, it became really burdensome. And so, I would be behind in my paperwork, and my bosses were like, hey, what are you doing? You're behind. Yeah, because I'm doing all of these things before I'm able to deal with whatever the issues are, whereas my counterparts don't have to do any of that. So to me, it's carrying that identity of being a person of color and having that the language, being bilingual, coming in and recognizing the difference.
And did you recognize it at the time? Were you aware of this unevenness?
No, not until I went to work. Not until I got my first job in Child Protective Services did I recognize that there was a situation. And I was like, this is weird, that why do I have 10 cases and somebody only has 3, and so what's going on, with that piece. And so then when I spoke to my supervisor, that's what she told me, that it was just, well, we just have more people that speak Spanish. And so, we're going to just give people, so then I never got to work with a lot of people of other cultures because the need for Spanish speaking individual was pretty high. Mm-hmm. So that's where I started off before I met Deborah at a domestic violence program. So I'll stop here so you could catch up, Deborah, and then we'll continue.
And by the way, shout out to Child Protective Services, me too.
Yes,
I was an investigator, so.
Yeah, it's the hardest job I ever hated in my whole life.
I completely get it. I wouldn't change it for the world, but man.
The training was incredible.
Yes, that's what I say. Yeah. It is, boy, you learn everything very quickly.
Yeah. I tell everyone, if you want to start in social work, in the field of social work, you don't know what you want to do, I start with Child Protective Services because you get all of the different institutions. You are literally exposed to every single institution. And then you can figure out what you want to do from there.
That's wonderful.
Yeah. Don't stay more than 2 years, though.
Well,
like I did.
I didn't start out in Child Protective Services. My journey is a little bit different. After graduating from undergrad, getting my bachelor's, I went to work for a nonprofit in Newark, New Jersey, and very small and not very much money. And I needed money, so I left that job and I went into corporate. And that was quite the experience for me, because I worked in international reinsurance, being not only very few women, but definitely the only woman of color. And I was there for almost, well, 17 years, and I became a VP, but I hated it. And some people thought I was crazy when I walked away, but I went back to school because I knew where my love was, where my real passion was. And even in corporate, I found myself being everybody's therapist anyway. So I went back to school to do this work. And so after graduating and everything else, I did some work for a family mental health center that was in Newark. And then I went I volunteered first for a domestic violence agency. And then I started working there, and that's where I met Glaceria, which is, I hate to say it, Glaceria, it's got to be 25 years.
I know when you
Let's,
said that to me the other day, I'm like, you're old.
yeah, well,
So
well, yeah, I am.
what drew you
Yeah.
Me
both to
too.
domestic violence?
For me, it was kind of natural from Child Protective Service. Actually, I resigned from Child Protective Services, and I wanted something to do something different. And of course, I enjoyed working with children, and so I started working with children in a domestic violence program. And so that's how I got started with TV. Yeah, and eventually became director of residential services.
I think I've always had, and was never really encouraged to talk about it out loud, this passion that I have about women and the issues and the things that women face. And violence against women was one of those things that you couldn't escape. It was everywhere. And so that's how my interest, and it was one of the best things I ever did, because you learn so much about power and control, and that how violence against women um, doesn't care about race, doesn't care about your social status, doesn't care about your
Hmm.
education. And it's like, wow, this is one of the few things that's universal. Um,
Hmm.
and so that's where it started for me.
Hmm.
It's this passion I have for about what for women
Right.
and children. But
And therapists so often, certainly in my case, there were roots in my history that I didn't
mhm,
understand that I was doing. And when I worked with Child Protective Services, and also I did the same, very similar path, where that I wanted to do more, and but I wanted it to, rather than catching it on the back end, catching it on the front end.
Hmm.
And it was all about protecting families and in all these different ways. But of course, I was unconsciously trying to save my own. And that
mhm,
took me, again, that was a process of figuring that out. But
yes, yeah.
do either of you think any of your early history
Oh,
is?
Oh,
absolutely.
I was just going to say, absolutely, Sue. And it's like, you know, one of this person, Ken Hardy, who we did supervision with, um, used to always ask the question, what brought you to the work? And he would
Hmm.
say, and you can't say, oh, I want to help people, because that's not
Hmm.
really what brought you to the work. And
Hmm.
so that's one of the things, possibly, but it's not the main
Hmm.
thing. And so
Hmm.
for me, it was like this. I grew up with violence around me, and not understanding a lot of it. And it's like, oh, that's what really brought me to the work. That's why I
Hmm.
volunteered. That's why I did all of that. And so, yeah, it was there for me. So,
Mhm.
Hmm.
um,
And to me, the working with children was, that was kicked off by a fellow student when I was in grammar school in New York City, who came in with marks and bruises and hickeys on her neck. And so of course, you're in a Catholic school, and the sisters were like, wait, we can't have this kid stay here. And then, come to find out later on that what happened to her. But I always wondered in that moment, like what happened to her. And I wanted to help her. And she would always sit in the corner, like really quiet and not really interact with other kids. Like it was, you could see it on her that she was carrying, a big load. And I just said, wow, that's really interesting. And that always stayed with me. So when I went to school, and I didn't study social work as an undergrad, I studied more sociology just to kind of see what's going on in the community, in the world, that kind of allows quote unquote these things to happen to children. So
So
And I'll
then
just,
this fateful meeting. I'm sorry. Go right ahead.
I was just going to add, in terms of what brought me to the domestic violence, and when I said that I worked in corporate and wanted to get out of that, and all, because race is not something back then. This is a long time ago. It wasn't talked about, and I really thought, I really want to be in a field while I'm helping people, and I really had this naive idea that it's kind of like kumbaya.
hmm
Everybody gets along, and there's no racial stuff, and
We're all pink on the inside.
I learned something very different.
hmm
So
right.
yeah.
And Child Protective Services, of course, kids of color were the ones that were being placed in, white homes mostly. And so it was like a big to do, if we had a white kid who needed to go into a foster home that was a person of color. It was a big deal. It was a big deal. Maybe they would last 24 hours there and then immediately get moved out. So looking at those pieces and just kind of like sitting with it and just just having experiences, you know and in child protective services you also have, I had a horrible experience where somebody, you know shooed me off their property with a rifle, basically, and said, "Get off my property," and use a slur to identify Latinos. And so, when I went back to the office, and I'll never forget this, I went back to the office and told my supervisor. She said, "Are you sure? Are you sure that's what happened?" I'm like, "How do you confuse a gun to your head like that?" And she's like, "Are you sure?" And then she's like, "Well, I'm going to send so and so." And I said, "How are you going to send so and so? She's black. And this is what would happen with me. So if you send anybody, it can't be a person of color, I'm not going to, divert our attention to that. But I mean, it was just a very difficult thing. And it's when race started to really open my eyes, but I didn't know what to do about it. Like it was, things were happening and I didn't know what was happening. Didn't
Yeah,
have the
that
vocabulary.
exact, and that's exact. This dawning
hmm
realization. It sounds like is
Exactly.
is part of it. So you're noticing these things.
hmm
And Deborah, you're saying that you're in corporate culture and things were happening, but you were
Oh yeah.
experiencing things, but it wasn't yet formed in your mind. Is that right?
Not at all.
Yeah.
I didn't know what the it was, but I knew that there were things that were being said to me and experiences that I had that somehow were connected to race. And like one of the last things that happened, I'll just tell this story really quick, was about a promotion that I knew I deserved, and I finally went to a senior person in the company, and I said, you know, went through the whole thing about the work I've done, and this person, white male, said to me, "Well, so and so was promoted. Well, he's tall, he's good looking. His wife is from it was a different country. I won't even say." And they had these two beautiful children, and I sat there and I listened. And then I repeated what he said to me. I said, "So, until I can grow to about 6 feet tall, marry a woman." I just repeated, and it hit him what he said to me, that it had nothing to do with the work. I wasn't the face that they wanted for the company. So I knew back then that I was like, okay, I'm out of here, and going to pursue something that I really love. But I had a really and thank God I knew Glyceria at this time. This was after we worked at a domestic violence agency, when in private practice, and it was a family. Some people have, when I've presented, I've told this story because it was such a painful experience for me, where I was working with a particular child, and divorced parents, and they were white, probably I would say upper class. Anyway, the father did not want it was to, his children to work with me, but this one little girl, his one daughter, she was only about 8 years old, and he had to bring her, but he didn't come into the office. He didn't even come in the building. He sent her in, and Sue, when I say this little girl had on the largest Confederate flag belt buckle. And she says, Miss Deborah, my dad told me to show this to you. And I knew why he did it. But in that moment, I just said, oh, and you tell him Miss Deborah loved it. Thank you so much, right? And she never wore that again. But after that session, I was really, I was really shaken up. For a number of reasons, because, I knew that was about race.
Mm-hmm.
And it bothered me that you would even use your child to do something so racist. Being in this field, race is present.
Mm-hmm.
And there are other ways that we've experienced
for
it
the
too.
clients as well as for the
As for us.
clinicians, or social workers, because that's when we got together at the domestic violence place, and we were working in two separate areas. Deborah was doing the clinical, and I was doing the residential, and so then someone decided that they, quote unquote, wanted to offer the same services to to bilingual, and to the Spanish speaking community, and so they wanted to provide these services, but not provide any what is it, like money to us, and so we were just going to do it just to do it, and so
Right.
we all kind of like rebelled, all of the people who were bilingual and other people who supported us, and one of the people who was bilingual happened to be a white woman, and she said, no, I put money into this, I moved to a different country, this is a skill, and I need to get reimbursed for it, and so she stood up to the administration, and so they suspended her. And so it was like, wow, they suspended her. So what are they going to do to us if this is what they did to her? And so that kind of started. So before that, I was seeing how the clients were being were being treated differently by the community where the domestic violence shelter program was located, because prior to having clients of color, the women would be able to go to the nearby library and sit down for like the story time, and they had different activities at this particular library, and the library was walking distance to the facility. And so when people of color started to come in, or at least a little more than usual, they started saying that they could only provide services for the people who resided and owned a home in the community. So I thought, wow, this is unbelievable. That this is the stuff that people the kids are telling. Then the kids would come home and they would say, oh, Glyceria, you're not going to believe what my teacher said. And I didn't know how to respond. And I said, well, what did your teacher say? That I was the first Black kid that he's ever taught. And he said it in front of the whole class. And I said, wow, like that was just, these things that were happening to them. The women would go food shopping. And if they went food shopping with the volunteer that just dropped them off, they were questioned when they got to the store. But if the volunteer, who was generally a white woman, would go with them, they were not harassed. They were not at all questioned about anything. So,
one of the last little thing about the working at that agency, I think for a very long time, most of the clients were white women. Mm-hmm. And then they started to see more women of color, because a lot of times women of color would not go to these agencies. And so with that, they started to hire more people of color. And along with that, what happened was we began to see things. Now, we still didn't have all of the language for it. And again, not knowing what the it is, but something's not right. Something is wrong in the way that this one is described versus this person. And, we would get calls like just this code language from other agencies And so I guess word got out at this particular agency, hey, they've got a number of people of color working there. And so we would get calls from other agencies and we would hear, we had this person, I think they'd be more comfortable in an urban area. So the minute we heard urban, okay, here we go. This is
Mm-hmm.
a person of color and they want to
Mm-hmm.
send them. It's like, okay,
Mhm.
okay.
Or
So,
the other piece was the language, you know.
yeah,
They have an accent, like a heavy accent. So we just want to make sure that they get the services that they need, and we know that you have bilingual staff.
yeah,
Mm. So it's like a funneling, collecting and a funneling over there. And do you
yes.
think there's been already so many examples, and I can see the subtlety, but also not the subtlety,
Hmm.
um,
Hmm.
and maybe a range. I'm not sure. What is your perspective on the awareness of of the offender, like the belt buckle example is very, very
He knew what he was doing.
consciously clear,
Yes.
but because part of what we're wanting to do, right, is make it more conscious and aware, like the invisible discrimination and bias, making it the implicit explicit.
Hmm.
So I'm just curious, like, kind of what your thinking is around, to what degree, where, and how that impacts how it feels, or if it impacts it at all. It might not impact it at all. When you
Oh,
feel it, you just feel it.
Hmm.
you feel it, and I understand a lot more of it now, but back then I think it hurt more
Hmm.
because it was coming from someone that you really liked, and you thought, oh, this person's I'm
Safe.
going to date myself. Cool, they're okay. And it's like, wow, you just said that to me, or you see a couple of women of color talking, and you think that there's something, we're planning a revolution or something, or oh, you're afraid of me, or oh my God, you don't feel safe around me. I dealt with
Hmm.
it was so crazy at one point, and it's also the reason why for me when I left I said I would never work in another agency um, because it was this I don't feel safe when being
Hmm.
challenged, and it was something that I experienced a lot with white social workers, male social
Wait, just
workers.
to clarify, when you don't feel safe when you're challenged, or that when you challenge someone, they
When
don't
I
feel safe.
challenge them,
Okay.
yes,
Hmm.
and
The
that is
dynamic,
always the dynamics. It's
right?
always the fallback.
Hmm.
And so again it was this I know this is because of my race, but it's a hard thing to
Hmm.
prove.
Right.
And Glacira and I both had experienced where oh well, we need a third person in here, as if you know we were going to turn into the Sharks and the Jet from West Side Story. And
Yeah,
it,
yeah,
it was absolutely it
yeah.
was
And coming in
absolutely
with a
crazy.
recorder.
Coming in with a
I don't feel
recorder.
safe. I need to use
Yeah,
the recorder,
yeah,
the
yeah.
recording machine, because I don't know what's going to happen. I was floored.
And also, how do you argue when somebody says that they don't feel safe?
Hmm.
Exactly.
Hmm.
Exactly. I can tell you probably the final straw for me was when, and I had people reporting to me, but this particular person didn't feel safe because when I was doing their review or when I had to call them in to talk about something, I would have a frown on my face. And that was scary.
Hmm.
And I knew then, and when I had to meet with the executive director, I knew then, for my own sanity, for my own sense of self, I cannot be in this environment anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that's when I had said, I'm going into private practice.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I'm
And
going to,
can y'all translate what you know now? So when you were both hearing, "I don't feel safe," and the recorders and the third people, like, what's the actual message that people are saying, or what's that coming from? You know what I mean? Like, what are the words with that communication?
Well, I mean, there was a certain extent of how dare you, who are you, and it felt like we're not good enough. Like we weren't good enough to like our word wasn't good enough. Our style of supervision, what we were saying, like what was it that was going on? But it made me feel like, oh my God, do I matter? Do I not? Am I good enough? And I'm not good. Like you start to question, yourself. about what you're
Right.
doing. Like, like, did we say anything that was inappropriate? Did, like we were constantly checking, Deborah and I were constantly checking the vocabulary, how we were sitting, like the tone, like,
Yeah. Yeah.
it was really difficult because people weren't used to people of color in positions of power,
I was
you
just
know?
thinking that it's an
Yes.
Yeah,
authority,
Yes.
right?
exactly.
You're
Yes.
Yeah.
not,
Hmm.
Yes.
yeah. Hmm.
Yes.
Yeah. And
Yes.
and it and
We.
it and it was very threatening, to them.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
And
so
to you.
yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean,
And to
Oh,
me,
talk
and
about
I,
not
absolutely.
and
safety.
that,
Oh,
yes,
they're not
that's what
safe.
it
Okay, so if
was.
you're not safe,
Yep.
I'm not safe. Like, wait,
Yeah.
what's fitting to
Yeah.
happen after all of this meeting?
Yeah.
So
And
yeah.
I think that's such an important point about there not being used to having a
Hmm.
person of color say that your work is not up to par. Or
Hmm.
we had this experience teaching also
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
where a student literally
Hmm.
wrote on on her paper that
Yeah,
how and she turned in a horrible paper, didn't bother to spell our names
horrible.
correctly, and she was a white student,
Didn't follow the
very
directions
privileged,
either.
and that for us, it
Hmm.
was uncomfortable for her to have these two women of color
Hmm.
um, judge her.
Yep. Judge
Yeah,
her
and
experiences and read her
As the
paper.
teacher,
and
that's
read
what
her.
you're
Yeah,
being paid to
yeah,
Yes,
do.
absolutely,
yes,
absolutely,
yes, yes.
absolutely. We were floored. We were floored, and when we were teaching, some of the students said that they've never seen two adjuncts of color. I mean, here we are in this institution, and that was the first time. And then one of the students, which I thought, wow, one of the students looked up the articles that we had provided and came back and said in class, oh, I looked up the articles and they were all written by people of color. um
Right. And
uh,
what was the course?
Microaggressions in the
In
what do
the
you call it,
clinical
in
setting,
the
yes,
clinic setting. Yeah.
So they're
yes,
And
signing up to learn about this.
mhm,
yes,
yeah.
yes,
And she
yeah,
said, why
yeah,
didn't we get this material in other
yeah.
classes? Like, so she was questioning. I mean, that particular, she wrote phenomenal paper, but she was questioning, why wasn't she exposed to more of that? And but it was interesting that she felt something to go and read these articles. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm.
But I think that one of the things too of even before getting to this point, there were so many different types of struggles that I had because I went to predominantly white universities, both and for undergrad and graduate school. And I learned so much about the theories, and then after graduating, I go to these workshops and these seminars, and I was still sort of struggling about how to make it fit, um, and because I was still trying to be what I was taught,
Hmm.
and I didn't know that that's very Eurocentric, and maybe that's why it didn't fit, and
Exactly.
just trying to come to a place of I'm a black woman, and I'm a black woman in that therapy session as
Hmm.
well.
Hmm.
I'm not suddenly somebody else.
Yeah.
And I remember, and I'll go back again to something that Ken Hardy had said to us in the supervision group, that your professional informs your personal, and your
Hmm.
personal informs your professional. And
Hmm.
so the more that I was learning about race, racial microaggressions, what it does to your sense of self,
Hmm.
it spilled over into my personal life, but it was also, yeah, that's what it is. I can't be anything other than me.
Exactly.
I'm black, I'm animated, I'll use humor.
Yeah.
I had to I had to colorize so much
Hmm.
of what I learned. That's the way I
Hmm.
think of it. Because Syria
Yeah.
says
No, and
season it, but I had to
yeah, yeah.
colorize it.
But and the thing that Ken and also Monica McGoldrick through the Multicultural
Yes,
Family Institute, where we
yes,
also, went, she, he and she pretty much were telling us to be authentic, and to look at our histories
yes,
through genograms, and to look at our histories so that we can figure out who we were, what happened to us, and where we are. and it was all of that. And the years that we had Ken Hardy as a supervisor, I mean, he was phenomenal in, we would bring up a case, and then I don't know how he did it, but it was like working right back to you. And I know that I only left one or two sessions with, without crying, because it was so intense, but it really made you kind of look at yourself and look at your experiences.
Oh,
And always
absolutely.
reminds me of what Deborah said to me one time about what her professor said, which was, whatever is going on with you is going to come through that door in the form of a client. And to this day, I'm like, okay, really stop it with the mama drama. Like I had mama drama. So
Yeah.
I'm like,
Yeah.
can we stop it with the teenagers and their
Yeah.
mama drama? Like, but that's what happens, and
Yeah.
so it's like the universe is trying to let you know something, trying to
Yeah.
help you with stuff. But I mean, but that's the thing. It's like learning a little bit as we went along.
And you
Yeah.
And
weren't,
could,
I'm sorry.
oh, go ahead.
Well, just one quick thought, just to clarify what you were just saying. The colorization or the seasoning, it's like you first had to get unseasoned or
Yes.
uncolored, right?
Exactly.
Yes.
Right.
Exactly.
So the
Yes.
Yeah.
training
Yes.
implicitly made you white, or you know what I mean? Not you,
Yes.
made you
But
not
it
you.
confirmed our
Exactly.
experiences too. It confirmed our experiences with words,
Yes.
and that made a big difference. And then once we started
Right.
to see race, you can't unsee it.
Yep.
Like
Right.
literally movies,
Yeah. Yeah.
plays.
It was this experience that the way that I think about it and the way that I can, is that I, I was expected, although it
Hmm.
wasn't said directly, but I was expected to be like a white therapist, to be
Hmm.
white, because that's what the training is. And I
Hmm.
and I will say the first experience I had where, oh, there's something different, that was I went to the Multicultural Family Institute used to have these annual conferences, and
Hmm.
I went, and then I went through their 2 year training program, and um, and one of the things that they would talk about in Monica and the staff, but at part of the training, was the self of the therapist. I
Hmm.
had to understand and learn, okay, so yes, you're a
Hmm.
Black woman, but what have you internalized
Hmm.
about that?
Hmm.
So looking at my family of origin, so much of
Hmm.
it, that was the beginning. That
Hmm.
was where, oh my gosh, this stuff, I'm beginning to learn what the it is
Hmm.
that's been there, that I
Hmm.
didn't have the words for, that I
Hmm.
couldn't prove. I just know what I felt.
Hmm.
I just
Mm.
know
Right.
what I felt.
Hmm.
Um, and that was the beginning
But
of
and also that experience, the years there at the institute was also about, unpacking our own stuff, our own trauma, our own
mhm.
experiences, and how does that inform our current, how our behaviors,
It's
and
this
our
whole,
belief systems. And
yeah, this
hmm.
deconstruction.
Hmm.
And I love
Yes.
you talking about the
Yeah.
tears, because it's like you've ingested something,
Hmm.
and to get it out is such a bottom up, it's
Hmm.
Yes.
and sounds like you're saying it's in your cells, and
It's an
then you have to
internal,
get it
yeah,
out.
You have to get it
exactly,
out.
exactly,
Hmm.
Oh
exactly.
Hmm.
boy. And then
Hmm.
you're reclaiming,
Your
discovering and
identity.
reclaiming.
Hmm.
And then
Yeah.
and the other, I'm just so interested, like, two women of color, but you're also, you have very similar experiences, but you also have really
Very
different
true.
experiences.
Hmm. Hmm.
So, let's just pick up on wherever you all want to go, but I'm just kind of want to highlight too, of like what's similar and what's different.
Well, for me, I mean, a lot of this, the stuff that happened to me when I was in a clinical, place is like um, if I was meeting with a Latino client, and one of the things is that you're not supposed to touch your client or whatever, but when you're working with a Latino client, hi, it's about hugging, and they give you a kiss, and they may bring you a goodie. Oh my God, I thought of you, blah blah blah. Bring this goodie, and if we're speaking in Spanish in the hallway. At times I was called into a director's office to say, you're supposed to be speaking English, unless you're in the session, or if a white person comes into the room, you need to switch language. I'm like, no, I was in the room first. I need to maintain my language with my colleague, but so to me that piece was always like So I could be bilingual for your purposes, but then I'm not getting paid. So of course, after a while, I'm like, oh, so what's the starting salary? Oh, and what's the salary for someone who's bilingual, bicultural? Because that's the other piece too, that people don't recognize that, I can't just start with the client like the way anybody else would. Like I literally have to, well, first of all, I have to be vetted by them, right? Like they want to know where I'm from, how long I've been in this country, and I give them that information because if that's what you need to feel comfortable and whatever, I'm fine with that. Because I'm not disclosing anything major, but and it makes a difference too because then they connect like, oh, well, I'm from this country, oh, we say different words for different things, so they kind of let you know like, oh, there's going to be some stuff. And then talking about what their experiences have been with mental health in their country, because the other thing too is, some people are here documented, some people are here undocumented, so and then how they came into this country also makes a difference. Did they pay a coyote to come over, or did they, or did they come and their visas expired? So there's all of these different ranges, and different situations too, because like I worked a lot with teenagers when I did in home, where, the mother left the child with the grandparent, with the grandparents, and then came to this country to make money and to send money and everything else. And I start working with a teenager who's really angry at their biological mother because they just recently got together. And this particular family, he recently found out that his mother had a second family, when like a 10-year-old brother, and he's 14, so in his mind, for 10 years she's had this kid I didn't know about. For 10 years she had this husband and I did, so you're dealing with all this loss, you're dealing with pain, you're dealing with language issues, you're dealing with immigration stuff. So you're dealing with all of these different things before you can even get to the depressive symptoms. And so it's like it takes a while. So yeah, you need to give me more money because it takes a minute to be able to orientate them to therapy, and for you as a therapist to orientate to whatever their circumstances are. So it's a lot, and it's heavy, because immigrant stories are not easy, because it's not just, coming to the US. It's kind of like, it's not just where you're going to, but what you're running from. And so there's a lot of history, with people when they leave. So when I see the US, saying all sorts of stuff about immigrants, it really hurts, because I know as an immigrant myself that it's not an easy process to learn the language. It's not an easy process to learn the culture and to maintain or some semblance of, okay, I like these things from this culture, like a balance, and I like these things from this culture, because you're going up against your parents, and what the cultural dictates for you. So.
Wow. Yeah.
Sorry, that's a lot.
Oh no, that's okay. It's like,
Well,
because
I'm not sorry, but
thinking
that's a lot.
about
Not
that
sorry.
question about us being two women of color and experiences being a little bit, they're similar, but there are some differences. And I think for me, as a Black woman, I think, and especially how I grew up, and the messages to me, there was the message that, remember, you're Black and that things are going to be different. But with that was the message, but get your education, carry yourself a certain way. And I remember thinking, oh, okay, so if I do all of that, it's as if that would be this protective shield, and I would be seen as, and this is so crazy because this is also something else to work through, as one of the good ones. Okay.
Yep.
And I think Ken Hardy calls it a gem,
Yes.
good enough minority. But all the things I was supposed to do. Well, I did that, and it's like, well, I'm still followed in the store. I'm still, I still go through all of these things. So it was so much trying to figure out all of what they were, and these experiences that I had, finding the words for them, and understanding that it's not because I lack. It's not that. There are all these systems, all these things that I'm up against, that the family I came from thought, just get an education, because that's what they saw as the way to make it in life, to
Exactly.
better your circumstances. Yeah, somewhat, but it didn't protect me from being reminded of
Mhm.
the fact that I'm Black and um, considered less than
Mhm.
in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And even when I first started out in private practice, I had a number of white clients, especially where my office was. And, you get vetted because they have to make sure, are you, let me put it this way. It was the craziest thing because either it was, let me make sure you're educated enough, you know what you're doing, or I felt like I'm their Oprah. So it was this weird thing that I was trying to
Mhm.
figure out as part
Hmm.
of my journey. What is happening here? Um, and then I knew I I really want to work. I started getting a few clients of color, and there are not enough therapists of color. Let's face it,
Mhm.
there isn't. Um, and I just wanted to provide a space,
Hmm.
and that's who I wanted to work with. Um, were my clients of color. Uh,
Hmm.
and yeah, so I do a lot of work with men and women of color. Yeah,
Hmm.
One of the things,
unapologetically.
yeah,
Exactly.
absolutely. Thank
Exactly.
heavens.
Exactly.
And, we will in our show notes fill it with resources for anyone listening to try to connect, both for young therapists that are of color
Oh,
Hmm.
and getting this kind of good supervision and deconstruction,
Yeah,
like
that's what
finding
Deborah and I,
themselves.
yeah, yeah, that's
Exactly.
what Deborah and I want to do is
oh my
work with
gosh.
people who, people who want to work with people of color, and just having like a group, consultation group with other therapists, that are going through similar experiences, and that
That's
way we can help
fantastic.
out, you know.
One of the things that's really striking me too is the invisibility of this and
Hmm.
how that it's constant, and people would deny it or really
Hmm.
not see it.
Hmm.
You might not even see it. This is
Hmm.
a terrible, probably, analogy, and you tell me if so. But one thing that I was thinking about is like, during COVID, how people would like pull away from you.
Hmm.
And so I'm thinking from my perspective, it's like, it was so hard not to think, even though I knew they were scared of germs and things like that. But when I could physically feel people pull back, it was impossible for me not to for that not to hurt, even though I knew what was happening.
Hmm.
Like,
Hmm.
And then I think about
absolutely.
that times 100,000 million little micro things like that. That even before even so it is something like I think this conversation is so important because the more we can be conscious of it and see it, both to own it, to even know we're doing it, but also as someone not in the majority culture to be able to name what it is and not internalize it as you.
Yes.
Hmm.
Yes.
Man, if that would be
And I
Well,
think
I
I
mean, we
think
did.
so,
Go ahead, Deborah.
oh, I was just going to say that that is the difficult part, and that is a constant struggle. And I will not sit here as if I am at this place where, oh, everything's great and all of that, because that's not where I am. It is still a struggle for me to do that. So
Hmm.
yeah.
Yeah. I was going to
Um,
say about, that's why it's so important that any therapist, and I feel very strongly about this, any therapist that works with people of color should have done or continue to do their work on their own
yes.
racial identity.
Yes. Yes.
We both
Yeah.
went through also undoing racism, which was really
Yes.
powerful too, and
Yes.
really helped us kind of see some of the stuff that
Hmm.
was going on. So again,
Hmm.
the ongoing training and exposure, and just it's so critically important. It's so
Hmm.
important, and I don't see enough interest, from folks to be able to want to do that. I know for one, like I said to Deborah, I'm going to try this experiment, and I gave an article that I feel very strongly that every therapist should read, and I think I put it, I think I referenced it in the thing I gave you, but you know, because it's such a good article by Dr. Sue, and I gave it
Can
to
you name?
10
Do you know the name
white
of the
clinicians.
article off the top of your mind? So that because
It's on Google, but let me see, microaggressions in clinical settings, something like that, by Dr.
Yeah.
Sue
right, I just wanted to like make
Doral
sure that
Sue.
it got
Yeah,
out there since that
yeah,
was
and
what you're
so that
recommending.
it's Googled. It's you could get it on Google
Good.
PDF, and it's free. And so I gave it to 10 clinicians, and I said, "Can you guys read this so we can have a conversation about it?" And blah blah blah. Tell me what your thoughts are, this and that. So a week later, so they said, yeah. And a week later, I went to them. They didn't read it. I went to them again 3 weeks after that. Didn't read it.
Yeah.
And I finally went like a month later, and one of the women said, I don't see why I need this because race never comes up in our sessions.
Yeah.
Okay, working in a clinical setting in a predominantly Latino community, it doesn't come up. I have yet to have a Latino or a Black client where race is not discussed in our session, and I don't bring it up. I mean, I'm not saying I don't bring it up. I bring it up. I ask, but they bring it up, and especially after George Floyd. I mean, that was like we were inundated, with people because George Floyd could have been an uncle, a brother, an uncle, a father, a husband, a brother, and so we were inundated. Yeah.
Yeah.
So can you
But I
all?
was inundated before then. I think,
Mm.
and it's not trying to be political or anything like
Mm-hmm.
that, but if I'm honest, the calls that I received
Mm-hmm.
when Donald Trump was elected
Mm-hmm.
president, it was people who I hadn't seen in a long time were calling because of the things that they were experiencing at work with different colleagues, and trying to figure all of this stuff
That it
out.
kind of unleashing something.
Yes.
Well,
The
colleagues that you
contempt.
thought were
Yes.
allies. Yeah.
That you thought
Yeah.
that they thought were
Mm-hmm.
allies, and
Mm-hmm.
that turned out not to be, and how painful
Mm-hmm.
that was, and being really hard on themselves that they didn't see it, and why didn't I recognize this, that type of thing, and then as Glacier said with George Floyd, it was just and then for me also during the shutdown,
Mm-hmm.
because I was seeing clients online, and I had a number of Black clients that lost multiple members of their family during that shutdown.
Yeah.
And that I think that was between that period and with George Floyd. Those were probably the most difficult times for me as a therapist, especially as a therapist of color.
And what you
Exactly.
all are going to be providing, and I want you all to say that out loud too, so that we can do that pitch, is so important because I mean, my heart is just like, I'm just feeling it as you're speaking, and from this much of a distance, even time, all of those things, and so I guess what I'm, that we can't do this by ourselves,
Right.
and that you all are offering this incredible opportunity. So would you like to speak to that? And then where we're going, we can wrap up, once you guys tell us about your group. And then we're going to record again and get into much more about the racial trauma and your work as trauma therapists, and applying this into sessions, talking to white therapists about the mistakes we make, and what you've learned from working with people of color. So that's what's coming. But for right now, for all of you that are, interested in this and really doing your own work and working with more people of color, how do they reach you?
I think we give the email address, because what we're trying to do, we're doing groups, supervision, consultation groups. And I think it's so important because there are a lot more young therapists of color who are now in this field. And I don't want them to experience what I did. Those years of trying to figure it out and questioning who you are and am I good enough and all of those things, right? So that's part of it. I also it's very important to me that they understand trauma, which we'll talk about, because it changed everything for me. And beginning to see people through trauma, the trauma lens. And I also, we wanted to do a group where white allies are invited. We wanted one with just people of color, but we both feel like, okay, just in sheer numbers, there's not going to be enough therapists of color for all of the people of color. So we need white allies. But to be in the group, it's not going to be where we're going to be taking care of you and making sure that you feel like a good white person, because that doesn't help clients. And it's not about attacking people, but I think about, the consultation and the supervision that I've had, and it was always a challenge for me as a Black person. Okay, I know you're Black, but what does that mean? Who are you? And something else I'll just say really quick, when that I got from Monica McGoldrick when being at the Multicultural Family Institute, was that she always said, your story is as much in the room as your client. So you need to, how about you got to take a look at you and go deep and really know, okay, what do I really think about people who are of a certain social class? What is my truth? Because it's going to come through. It's going to come through. If no more than in your body language, you could be saying all the right words, but your eyes may be telling them something different. So that's why I think this stuff is so important. But Sari, I don't know if you want to.
No, I agree with everything that you said. Absolutely.
So what is the email for people to reach you?
Our email. We
The only reason I'm.
Yeah, it's BIPOCing therapist, BIPOCING therapist @gmail.com.
So BIPOC therapist.
BIPOCing.
Okay.
Yeah.
BIPOCING.
Yes.
Oh, wonderful.
Therapist.
And again, it will be linked in our show notes. You can find that if you go to therapistsuncensored.com. And the episodes will all be right there, but you can also search for any topic, actually. But you can search this. I don't know what number this one's going to be, but you can just search race and it'll come up. Racial trauma. It'll come up.
Okay.
And those show notes are going to be really good. We do encourage you to go and check them out because we're going to load them with resources. This is so big. And just one other quick thing. I love what you said, Deborah, about the safety for white people and like not wanting, this, what y'all both said earlier about people calling, I don't feel safe as almost like a trump card, right? So I like you calling that out. And also that safety being, first of all, it's not even real, right? It's a feeling. And that it's a privilege that we have walked around with this sense of safety and an inappropriate assumption of safety for way too long, so that we get a little discomfort and all of a sudden all flares are going off.
Exactly.
Right. So I just kind of want to echo that again around absolutely, this isn't about safety. There's going to be no safety is what I'd say. It's more of I think that you guys are going to expand people's tolerance for discomfort and help people go there. And stay in. So none of this flagging safety thing.
Right.
It's kind of like what we ask clients to do, right?
Absolutely.
We ask clients to just kind of sit with it, be with it, be in a moment. But
it's uncomfortable.
We don't want it. It's uncomfortable.
It was uncomfortable for us too. It was uncomfortable for us. And so, if you're going to get a little of discomfort, it's okay. You're in a safe setting, and this is, if you're going to make mistakes, this is where to make these mistakes, and be able to identify it. But being authentic, I think, is the key piece to working with people of color. Being authentic, because of our intergenerational traumas and everything else that's happened and all of the racism, we've had to learn, how to detect whether we're going to be safe or not, and the environment is really critical. Does the environment reflect me or does it reflect something else? Am I included in that? just even in decorations, or just even in, like having water,
Yes.
or having, I don't know, like Deborah, I remember in her office, she used to have like this bowl of, little bars, little, because sometimes, people need to eat, and so, but anyway, yeah,
And I want to get more into that, right?
yeah,
About
sure,
how
no
what
problem.
the seasoning looks like,
Okay,
for
Mm-hmm.
sure.
Mm-hmm.
So stick with us and for the next episode. And thank you very much for listening all the way through. If this is a episode that you have found valuable, we really encourage you to share it with anybody that you think would be interested. Part of our goal certainly is to continue to get these voices out and to hand the mic over. It's such a privilege to be able to do that and learn. So you'll be helping us out by sharing this. And if this brings value, certainly you could leave a rating and review for us on wherever you get your podcasts. Okay. Again, thank you for listening. Thank you both so much for sharing
thank you.
your
Thank,
experience.
thank
It's a
you.
privilege. And we'll see you around the bend.